Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of What's New in Prisma. Today I'm here with my colleague Sabin and also with another colleague, Tasin, who's going to join us the first time on the stream. He had some technical issues, but we'll pull him up here as soon as he gives up a thumbs up in the backstage area. All right, here we are. Hey, Tasin.
Hi,
Hey.
Niko. Hey, Sabin.
All right, so nice to see the both of you here on the stream with me. It's a new combination that we have here, and I think it's really nice also now that we are growing the developer advocacy team at Prisma. People are going to see different faces here on the stream every couple of weeks, and I actually think that this is really nice. And to give people a sense of who they're watching here today, I thought maybe we can start with quick introductions of who we are. And actually on my side, I've also missed a couple of the recent streams here. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Nicholas Burke. I have been with Prisma actually for 5.5 years now. So I started when the company was still called GraphCool, and then I accompanied the company through all the pivots from GraphCool to Prisma 1 to now Prisma 2, and now the application data platform that we're building. So it has been a wild and bumpy ride. I've been enjoying it, and I'm super delighted that I get joined on the Prisma team by fantastic team members as are you, Sabin and Tasin. So yeah, maybe Sabin, you want to quickly introduce yourself? What did you do before you started working at Prisma, and how did you end up here?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm Sabin Adams. I live in California, and I've been a full stack developer for like 7 or 8 years now. It's coming up on 8 years. I've worked at various different companies, from like startups to larger insurance related companies. So I've worked on a wide range of different kinds of teams. I've dabbled in some app development, and throughout all of that, I ended up finding a love for just like learning new things and sticking with like the upcoming products and sort of sharing my findings. And because of that, I started looking into developer advocacy, and Prisma was a product that I've been using for a while and really loved. So it's super awesome to have been able to join this team and advocate their product.
Nice. Yeah, welcome to the team. And how about you, Tasin?
So I started working at Prisma almost a year ago now, and I actually started as a developer success engineer. So the way I kind of got introduced to Prisma and to Niko and subsequently the entire Prisma team is through this project called How to GraphQL, which is this neat website that teaches people, well, how to use GraphQL. So I learned about Prisma through that, and I actually signed up as a maintainer for that project. And that kind of one thing led to another, and here I am at Prisma. So for Prisma, I was doing backend web development at another company called Technohaven, and I'm also a student, or at least was until yesterday. So I just graduated. My thesis defense was yesterday, and that went well. So yay!
All right, congratulations.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so thank you. Right, so I am really enjoying my new role at Prisma as a developer advocate, interacting with the community, learning from them, and I really appreciate the opportunity to teach them what I know as well. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, and that being said, I think the both of you both just gave your very first talks for Prisma, and these were both, I think, not last week, but the week before, right? It was our MongoDB launch week when you, Sabin, spoke at the Prisma and MongoDB meetup and presented a talk there. And Tasin, you spoke at the Redwood office hours in the context of their launch week, if I remember correctly. And I think both of these talks can be found online. I don't know if like either of you maybe has the links handy, but feel free to drop them in the comments maybe if you can find them. All right, then I think we'll do what we always do on this show in the very beginning, and that's we talk about the latest Prisma release that has just happened. And if anybody's confused, by the way, why this time, again, we had a release that happened after just 2 weeks after the previous release, because usually we follow a 3-week release interval. This time we only had 2 weeks. The reason for that is that the entire company is going on an offsite next week. We're all going to meet in person. Well, most of us, I don't think everybody is going to join, but most of us are going to meet in person close to Barcelona, and won't be available that much, and decided to do our release 1 week early because of that. But from now on, we're going to go back to our 3-week release cadence again. But let's talk about this week's release, the Pi release 3.14. Sabin, would you share your screen? Oh, you are already sharing your screen. I just didn't see it. So here we go. These are the release notes for the current release, and let's just scroll over them to see what we have. So first and foremost, the CockroachDB connector is now generally available. It has been running in preview for a couple of months now. And in fact, I didn't actually announce the guests that we have on our show today, but we will talk to a developer advocate from CockroachDB, to Aydrian. We'll have him on the stream later today. And we'll also chat with Matt Matheson, who is the founder of Trunk, a very interesting developer tooling suite that you all can check out. And they're using Prisma for their SaaS offering. And we're going to chat to Matt a little bit about that. But yeah, the CockroachDB connector is now generally available, and we'll talk to Aydrian about this later. Then we also have new indexes that you can now declare inside of the Prisma schema for Postgres. So the way how the Prisma schema works basically is that you define your underlying database schema that's usually defined in terms of SQL statements. You define it with this domain-specific language that we came up, the Prisma schema language. And in that sense, when you want to make use of the underlying database features, you have to wait until the Prisma schema supports them, unless you want to go and write raw SQL yourself. With this release, we're now introducing support for additional indexes that weren't previously supported. And I think, Sabin, you prepared a little bit of a demo, or at least a closer look into some of these indexes. So I'm looking forward to that in a bit.
Cool.
And if you scroll further down, so there we first see the notation for the indexes, but let's just finish the overview of the release notes before you can jump into your demo, Sabin. So if you scroll down a little bit further, we can see what this Prisma schema translates to. And there is the other big feature that we have released, or actually it's multiple features. It's improvements to the queryRaw API. And I think there are 3 improvements that we ship in general. So first, that raw scalar values are deserialized as their correct JavaScript types. That's the first one. Then the second one, Sabin, if you scroll down a little bit, is right there, the Postgres typecasts. And then the third one, and I think that's available even without the preview feature flag, it's an improvement to how the query parameters are sent to the database from the Prisma layer. So these are the main improvements that we have shipped with this release. And yeah, as a next step, I would suggest that you, Sabin, can jump ahead into the demo. Or whatever you've prepared to talk about the new indexes that are now available in Prisma. And maybe we could actually kickstart this conversation with just a little bit of an explanation what indexes in relational databases actually are. Maybe you can start with a brief explanation of that, and then just explain how these new indexes fit into that picture.
Yeah, so indexes will help speed up your queries by creating, I like to think of it as like a table of contents for like a book, where there's sort of a repository or a place that stores data, that points to records within tables based on certain indexing keys. And that allows you to look through that smaller table with more compressed data before scanning through your entire database for specific fields, which can be pretty taxing processing-wise.
All right, and why are there different kinds of indexes? So like what's just like the standard? I think one of the most common indexes is like called a B-tree index. Like what are these different types of indexes?
Yeah, so these different types of indexes apply different searching algorithms or indexing strategies that you would typically use based on what makes sense for your type of data. So for example, like you mentioned the B-tree, that's what would be called like a balanced tree index. And as it scans down the tree looking for the record that you're looking for, it stays balanced on both sides, and some of the ranges that it searches could be overlapping. And so sometimes it could take a little bit longer than one that would be like a, I can't remember what the name of it is, but there's another type of tree that can scan, and it's basically a unbalanced tree where you can scan down and it like narrows down the options quicker.
All right.
Very high level overview. That not a very technical overview. I'm not super versed on those, but yeah, there's different trees that make sense based on the shape of your data and how would make sense to query for it.
Nice. Yeah. So that like certainly helps to already have an intuition of what these indexes actually are. And indeed, I think the most important point here for people like not to get confused is it's really important to understand your own query patterns and the shape of your data in order to determine which index makes the most sense for you in your particular scenario. So that's just like a really important thing, I think, for everybody when they're building applications, really being aware of query patterns, being aware of data structures, because that then really gives you the space to optimize your queries.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think I'll go ahead and jump into some of the specific ones now. The first one that we're going to look at, and it's a newly supported one, is a GIN index. And the GIN indexes, you can apply a bunch of different what are called operator classes, and they change exactly what we were just talking about. They allow you to change what kind of indexing strategy to use based on your data type. So the first one that we have supported is the JSON bpath ops. And what GIN indexes are really good at indexing are queries on data where a single column in your table might hold multiple values. So maybe something like an array or JSON. It allows you to do different like containment and existence operators. So checking if an object contains a key or if an array contains a value. Those types of queries are what GIN is really good at being used for. And so what I'm doing right here in this model is I'm indexing the body column, which is a JSON type, and I'm telling it to use the GIN type of index with the JSON bpath ops operator class. And so what this is going to do is it's going to index any queries that use containment operators. So you can say this would be good for a query that says like search for any records in this table where the body contains a field of, let's say, first name with a value of Sabin. That kind of query would be indexed with this because it's searching for something that this JSON contains.
Nice.
Where there are other options, like right here, we're using the body, but we're not passing it any operator classes. This by default will use just the JSON B operator class, not the JSON B path. And this allows you to do a couple of more operations. It is a little bit slower in some cases than the JSON B path ops, but it allows you to do a wider range of containment and existence operators on your queries while still making use of the index. And then finally, within GIN, we have array types. So this is going to be good for searching for existence of certain values within an array.
Nice. And GIN stands for, by the way, I just looked it up, for Generalized Inverted Index, for anybody who was wondering.
Yeah, Actually, in the Postgres docs, it specifically says gin is not referring to the drink. It's referring to some other words. So kind of funny there. And I think there's actually a new index out there called rum that someone made that like builds off of gin. So they're following a pattern at this point. Yeah, the next type is a gist index. And what gist index are good for is for searching through data that can be found in like ranges. And this will speed up your queries using these type of operators where you're searching where things are greater than or less than, and just a bunch of these other different operators. And what this is meant for is specifically for indexing data types that aren't super common or that are sort of custom set by the database user. So for example, right here, we're using the inet type, which is not a very common type. And the way you would do a greater than or less than operator or any of these type of comparison operators is going to be different when looking at an address, because this would be like something like this, where how do you determine what's greater than or less than this? So what this does under the hood is indexes using a certain specific function that's customized to your data. And this is the gist index is basically a framework where you can build other indexes upon. So it's not really a specific index. It relies heavily on these operator classes. So it can actually support a bunch of different data types. And one of the main ones that it's used for is like geographic data types or like coordinates. And in this case, I'm using a circle data type. And you can actually index on locations like this, so you can run queries for finding overlapping circles on like an X and Y plane. It makes those kind of queries a lot quicker.
Nice.
Next, we have the SP gist, which is really similar to the gist index. The only difference here is that the SP gist is used for data that is non-overlapping. So if you have certain types of data that where their values aren't really the same very often, this type of index can get you a little bit quicker where you need to go. And actually have a note on this that I wanted to bring up. I can find it here. What I mean by non-overlapping is that your query tree would end up looking sort of like this when it's searching for the index. So you have a non-balanced tree where basically each branch doesn't have the same number of branches coming off of it. Mm-hmm. And so with this type of query, you can get quicker to your results rather than having to have a separate branch for each stage. So it allows you to skip a couple steps when querying and save some time there.
Very nice.
So that's really the only difference. The reason that gist even exists still is because it is a lot faster in a lot of cases, and the index size can be a lot smaller with the gist, just because of the way they store their indexes. And the last one here is a Brin index. So this is a, if I can remember the name, let's see, block range index. And this is good for sorting or for indexing data that's in sort of a sorted state in your table automatically. So for example, if you have automatically incrementing IDs, so it starts at 0 and goes up, Brin's going to be really, really good at indexing those. And it's actually, once you get above, I think the documentation said around 3 million records. Once you get above that amount of records, this index really starts to shine. It keeps your index size extremely low, like within kilobytes, and your query is really fast. And this right here, I'm using it for the date time field with the created at, because if you think about it, as you add new records to your table, this will be an incrementing field because the time's always moving forward. So if you index this field and then you query on the created at field, this is going to be a really, really fast query because of that. And I think that's all the major points. There are a lot of different uses for all of these indexes. For example, the SP gist and even the Brin have dozens of different class operators that you can apply based on your data types, but these are just sort of the major uses for it.
Nice. Okay, my last question for you, Sabin, is if an index makes the query faster, why wouldn't I go and just put an index on every field of my model?
Yeah, There's a couple reasons. A lot of times the indexes can be really big and take up a lot of data in your database. But also, if you index every column, you almost might as well not index any column, because then it's searching through all those indexes before you run your query, rather than just running your query. So there's a trade-off there. You have to be careful and think about what kind of queries you're actually running, rather than just trying to stick them everywhere.
All right, so we're coming back to the point of understanding your own query patterns that actually
Exactly.
Would allow you to specifically optimize the queries that have a need for optimization.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the database admin roles and database any specific database development role is so important, is because they have to understand the company's domain and the application's domain and really think about how they're querying the data. And these are the tools that allow them to speed those up.
Nice. All right, thank you so much for that overview, Sabin. That
sure.
was super interesting. Tasin, how does it look on your end? Should we try sharing your screen and see if it works for you to give a queryRaw demo?
Oh, first, how about we go through the release notes, kind of
All right.
discuss. Yeah.
Cool. I'll pull those up.
Yeah, exactly, Sabin. Maybe you can go back, and then Tasin can give us an overview of these improvements, what exactly it is.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the second thing this release has improved on is the queryRaw API. So those who don't know much about what queryRaw is, it's basically an escape hatch that lets Prisma access the underlying database directly, interact with it directly in SQL instead of Prisma's own query language. So this is super duper useful, because what will often happen in many applications is that Prisma can solve most of your needs, but there's like these one or two niche use cases that you have, or niche queries that you have, that Prisma doesn't yet support. So in those cases, you can use queryRaw to directly run SQL queries against your database.
Right.
And
so it's basically an escape hatch that people can use when a specific query that they want to run is not yet natively supported by the Prisma Client API. And that's when they can drop down to raw SQL and use this queryRaw API that's provided by Prisma Client.
Exactly. So you don't really have to use some other method when you do want to do raw queries. You can just use Prisma. So Prisma handles the entire connection aspect or the interaction of the database in all of the interaction forms that you need. So that's pretty awesome. So some of the changes in this release, there's three main ones, and we'll just go through them one by one. And a quick note before we do discuss the changes: these are, at least the first two, are behind a feature flag because there are some breaking changes here. Okay, so with that out of the way, so the first thing is that raw scalar values are deserialized as their correct JavaScript types. So what does that exactly mean? So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's a table of database types and their corresponding JavaScript types. So normally when Prisma runs a normal query, what happens is these database types gets converted into an appropriate JavaScript type. So for example, if there's a date time field in your Prisma model, what happens when you do run a query is that Prisma will fetch a date time and then convert it into a date before it gives you the object. So this is super duper useful because obviously JavaScript doesn't know what a date time field is, which is belongs to your underlying database. So this makes it easier all around to work with different fields and types. And now what this change entails is that when you use raw queries, you get this same benefit. So let's say you use raw query to fetch a date time field. Now that field will also be converted into an appropriate JavaScript type for you. So previously what would happen is it would be just a string. It would just get serialized into a string and it would return a string. But Prisma now can smartly convert the types for you as well. So this is pretty useful. And Okay, so we can move on to the second change.
Yeah, and I had one quick question for you on this.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not quite familiar. Did queryRaw, did all of these types used to be returned as strings, or was it just like types like datetime?
Oh, no, that was just an example for datetime, but basically Prisma would just serialize it appropriately. So I think JSON would get returned as like a serialized JSON, like a serialized string. Uh, Floats would get returned as, I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, it would basically not do all of these conversions would appropriately to the JavaScript types.
Okay,
Yeah, it's an
but
interesting
previously-
question, actually, like what the previous behavior was like. I'm also curious. Maybe anybody who's watching right now and who has used the queryRaw API, if you've experience with this, then feel free to drop that in the comments. Like, how did Prisma previously handle the deserialization of native database types?
Yeah, so the next thing is regarding typecasts. So this is Postgres specific. So Postgres allows you to convert types into basically turn cast, typecast, do the typecast during the queries themselves. So you can kind of see the syntax here. So you could be running a select query, which basically just returns some data, and you're trying to return 1.5 as an integer, and 1.5 would normally Postgres is able to convert 1.5, round it, and turn it into an integer for you, but this would previously return an error when you try to do it as a raw query in Prisma. But now this is fixed. So yeah, the release notes have a few examples. There's dates and floats. And yeah, previously all of these would return some kind of error, but now they work perfectly fine.
Cool.
Nice, very cool.
Great. And the third thing is query parameters are correctly sent to the database. This is so the previous two were mostly about like reading data, and this one is about writing. And you can basically, there's less bugs and it's more convenient to insert values of certain types, notably particularly big int, bytes, and decimal. Before there were some issues, but now those have been fixed. This isn't any kind of new feature. It's just an improvement in like the parsing and stability when using these types and inserting them with queryRaw and Prisma.
All right. Cool. Should we still try to give the screen the screen share a shot, Tasin, or skip it for this time?
Let's give it a go. 1 second. I will try to share my VS Code's instance.
Yeah, it's here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's just blank, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, maybe next time. Sorry, everyone.
All right. We'll skip the demo then for today. That's all right. And I think with that, we can already move on to our first guest that I was mentioning before, and that is Matt from Trunk. Let's pull him up on the stage. Hey, Matt. Great to have you here.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can all hear you.
Great.
Let me just quickly rearrange the pictures of everybody here. All right, I think now we're set. All right, hey Matt, welcome to the What's New in Prisma live stream. And we've chatted a little bit before the stream already, and I told you that when I took the first look at Trunk, I was a bit surprised how it would be using Prisma, because ultimately what you're building is also developer tools, and in that we're in a very similar business. Yeah, but before we start talking too much about Trunk, why don't you just give us a quick introduction of your background and how you came to where you are now, having founded Trunk.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. So my background, I've been a software engineer for about 10 years. Started my career working in mapping at Windows at Microsoft. Spent a few years there, then eventually went to Uber, where I kept working on maps, and then eventually moved to the self-driving car division there at Uber. So most of my history has been, most of my experience has been a lot of systems engineering, a lot of C++, a lot of 3D rendering, that sort of thing. And so, I think you mentioned how to become the found Trunk. That the sort of the inception of Trunk started at Uber, especially when we were working on the self-driving car project. There was a point there where that project had sort of grown organically, and it really, we were hiring quite a bit. We had quite a few engineers all contributing to one repository. And as that scaled, we started to run into some operational problems. I think any of your viewers who have spent a day trying to get a pull request merged into main that they think are already done, or fighting with like tests, that sort of thing. We've all experienced that sort of thing, and it started to kind of really come to a head at Uber. So we took some time, took a step back, got into a repository, and thought, how do we set this up so that it scales to all of these engineers? How do we make sure that we're leveraging as much automation as we can when it comes to keeping a code quality bar high, merge automation, all that sort of thing. And so spend some time looking around for vendors that would provide something that was an enterprise level, something that we kind of pull off the shelf, plug in, and move on. Because at the core, we really were focused on building a self-driving car, not so much focused on how do we, get static analysis running at scale. We didn't find any of those vendors, so we ended up kind of building some homegrown solutions, building up a team to kind of maintain those solutions, and then moved on to working on the self-driving car again. But that was sort of the inception of Trunk, and so we kind of noodled on that for a year or so, and about a year later, my co-founders and I, we left Uber, and we're thinking about kind of next steps to work on, and we really had enjoyed that time setting up a repository that could scale and grow and feed the needs of these developers. And so we said, okay, how can we kind of offer that to the public? What would be useful? And so really at the core, we're focused on building developer happiness. And so I kind of go back to that, like, I spent a day trying to get one pull request merged into main. That's, it's frustrating, it's demotivating as an individual contributor. It's frustrating as an organization. You have brilliant engineers who can't, move forward and get things done. And so kind of being able to automate and facilitate and simplify a lot of that stuff operationally is at the core of what we're trying to do at Trunk. So that's super high level, kind of how the idea came together. So yeah.
Nice. So as a quick side note, you are I couldn't hear you too clearly. I'm not sure if I was the only one. It wasn't super clear audio. But maybe you can see if you can switch a mic or something to a laptop. If it's not possible, then it was all right. I could hear you, but it wasn't too easy. I don't know. What about you, Sabin and Tasin?
Yeah, it was a little unclear. It sounds like the mic is far away.
Okay.
Yeah. With a little bit of focus, I could understand everything. And I particularly liked the point that you made, Matt, about developer happiness, because I really think that we're in the same business there, where developer happiness really is at the core of what we ultimately want to create. We want to make it a delightful experience again for developer to build applications, to be productive. And I think that only works when developers are also happy and are having fun at work. And we are trying to make that with databases, and you picked another kind of domain, a few other workflows where you want to achieve the same goal, basically.
Right. Is that audio better? Is that?
Oh, that's a lot better.
That sounds better, yeah.
Okay, all right, we'll use a laptop mic. Sorry about that.
No worries. So let's start talking a little bit about Prisma. So how did you personally actually discover Prisma? When did you hear of it for the first time? For me, that's always particularly interesting, actually, to learn about when people have started to learn about Prisma, because I have our entire history still on my mind. So I'm always curious when people jumped on the bandwagon.
Yeah, definitely. So for us, I think we found Prisma just over a year ago. when we first started setting up some of our first services and breaking ground on our SaaS offering. And at the time, so we wanted to build everything in TypeScript, both for backend and front end. So we evaluated a few different things, but Prisma came up pretty early, and I think it was pretty clear to me when evaluating the different options that Prisma was built with a similar mindset that we have for Trunk, which is let's have that developer happiness at the core. Let's make sure that the user experience is good, that the docs are good, that the interfaces are good. And so, that's what really drew us to it initially.
All right. And before we start talking about how you concretely use Prisma at Trunk, maybe talk a little bit about Trunk, what it actually is today. I think you have two main products, Check and Merge, that people can, I think they can host it themselves or use it just on their own, or they use your SaaS offering. Is that right?
That's right. So the first product, Check, is it's a way of automating code quality and linting, both in CI and locally on your developer machine. And so that's what you're thinking of when you download it and you run it locally. We have our own CLI that when you run Trunk Check, it runs static analysis over all of your code. It runs linting over all of your code. We can take care of a lot of things like running it in the background, running those linters in parallel, configuring those linters for you, making sure that you can just pull that, like I said, pull that off the shelf, plug it into your repository and be off and running, not worried too much about setting up that automation. And then the second product that we're just launching right now, we're onboarding a few customers to a beta, is Merge. And so we're focused on merge automation there. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a merge queue, but this is a service that automates the ordering of merging pull requests into a main branch. It's something that sort of grows organically at a lot of larger companies. It's something that we found a lot of benefit using at Uber, and so it's something that we definitely want to offer. So I'm really excited about that. We've been dogfooding that internally for a while, and just kind of bringing our first customers on this week, actually. So really excited about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think you're following another kind of strategy for developer tools there. That is, you see something that is used at a big company, like something that works, some kind of technical component you're building, some kind of workflow, and then you're kind of productizing that. And you think about, okay, how can I make this now available in a generic way so that everybody can use it? At Prisma, we are trying kind of the same with the application data platform, this new data access layer between your database infrastructure and the application layer that we're building, heavily inspired by things that have already been built at companies like Facebook or Twitter. And you now picked your workflows at Uber, and you saw, okay, like this is actually quite neat. I wish everybody could use that. So you decided to just go out and build it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, and I love hearing stories like that for that same reason, where it's like it's an issue where maybe there's a lot of boilerplate type stuff going on, or a lot of just developer time being spent on not developing the product, but getting things ready to develop the product. And that it's so cool to see companies like Trunk taking those little pieces and sticking them in as like one solid block of this is how you do this now. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
It kind of democratizes a lot of fancy technologies for everyone to use and enjoy that previously were only available to a select few companies.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because these large companies have lots of resources to dedicate to these internal teams, but it's fantastic when you can take a technology like that and offer it to teams of any size. They can just take it and be off and running and never run into that issue of scaling and run into that problem of, okay, how do we automate these things?
Yeah.
Nice. So you've got these tools that can be run locally, but you're also building the SaaS offering, and that's where you decided to use Prisma, because that ultimately is just like a regular web app with a front end, with a back end, with a database, and you needed a way for your back end to interact with the database. So you chose Prisma. And I'm wondering kind of what was your evaluation process for what database libraries you want to use for the Trunk SaaS offering?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we started doing these evaluations, a big part of it was, well, let's quickly prototype a few things with each of these see what it would be like using these moving forward. And I think the reason that we really ended liking Prisma the most was that it gave us that same experience that we're looking to develop or to deliver with Trunk. That it's easy to start using, it's easy to ramp up, it's easy to start to expand our use of it. I think you and I spoke a little bit earlier this morning about some of the other alternatives that we had evaluated. But a couple of things that I really like about Prisma is that it's the type of tool that's developed for the software engineers that we are seeing today. So engineers today are, they're people who have used Google as their only search engine. They never needed to learn how to write a query language to use a search engine. Their email clients didn't have a send receive button, or they'd never use a dedicated email client. We use these products, these technology products that just work, and Prisma delivers that same type of experience. So I really like the fact that with Prisma, when we get started, we write a schema, and that schema really defines how our database is laid out. It defines our objects, it defines those relationships, and both the migrations and the entities are generated from there. It gives us a great source of truth. And that lines up really well with other tools and technologies that I find a lot of benefit out of. So in our backend, for example, to communicate between services, we use gRPC and protobuf. And I like the same concept with gRPC. We have an interface definition. It's very clear what a service does, what its inputs and outputs are. And with Prisma, we get the same type of experience. We have a source of truth. We can look at the schema. It's written very well for humans to read, to parse, to understand what this database is going to offer. And then everything else just gets generated. We don't have to worry about, is this code old? Do we need optionals on this field? How does the TypeScript language intersect with SQL here? All that stuff's just taken care of. And so that right away has a huge attraction to it for me, because you can take that schema and you can share it around, you can link to it, all of the docs can point at it, and everyone can just parse it. One of the other things that I really liked about Prisma, and this is something that I've gained a real appreciation for lately with Trunk, is that the docs are easy to read. The actual Prisma docs are easy to read. They're well maintained. They're easy to find, easy to discover. That's not easy to do, but it adds a lot of value when you look at how is this organization going to scale. Every time we hire an engineer, it's very easy for them to find the word Prisma in the code base, Google Prisma, and then ramp up on Prisma with nobody having to say, write a quick paragraph on how we use Prisma or why we use Prisma. It's all very clear because it's well documented, it's well maintained. And so that was one of the big attractions for me as well when we first started using Prisma. It's a very professional, enterprise-ready tool, and something that we don't have to worry about running into edge cases, or do we need to fork it or patch it or wrap it or any of those things. I have a pretty strong reliability on the fact that it's going to work for us.
That's always very nice to hear. So you already mentioned that you're using gRPC on the backend for service-to-service communication. What else are you using in your stack in general, on the front end, on the back end? How do you pair all these technologies with Prisma?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the front end, we're just using a React app written in TypeScript. And then our backend is gRPC services communicating over gRPC in a Kubernetes cluster. All of that's hosted in AWS, and we manage deploys using CDK. And that was actually one of the other things that I mentioned this morning about that has really made things easier for us using Prisma, is the ability to work it into our deploy workflow. So one thing that we have done is when we need to deploy application code that requires a Prisma schema migration, we deploy an image, a container, to AWS Lambda that includes the Prisma client and all of our migrations. And when a code deploy happens, that Lambda also gets triggered to do any migrations that are necessary for that code deploy. And that always keeps our MySQL instance up to date. And some benefits there are that we never expose our MySQL instance outside of our private VPC. And that Lambda, because we deploy the Prisma code into that Lambda, it has access to the database, but we never have pipelines outside of the VPC or local developers needing to deploy and migrate that database. And so we have good security around the database, and Prisma helps to facilitate that. But what we've found is that we can take that same Lambda image and put it into any of our test scenarios. So integration tests that developers run on their laptop, tests that run against sandbox environments in AWS, they all can take this same image and run it in that test cluster, in that integration test, and bring up a MySQL database from nothing up to all the schema migrations applied, any seeds that need to be applied, all by just embedding that Prisma client along with a couple of migrations into that image. And that has really facilitated keeping our tests reliable. I think when you end up, you end up some situations, you have a MySQL container that has a volume that maybe gets out of date, or an image that you pull that needs to be updated, and those things they eventually rot a little bit. It's hard to maintain them. You forget how you built them the first time. But with this Prisma setup, we're able to always start from scratch. Every test starts from an empty database, runs the migrations, runs the seeds, and then runs the tests. And it's kept our tests very reliable, even to the point when I see pull requests that have schema changes, that have migrations in them, I'm very comfortable just approving the pull request. The pull request can go into main. And then from there, all the automated systems just make sure those migrations get applied at the right time. And that's one thing that I didn't anticipate using Prisma in the first place, but it's been fantastic being able to build that level of automation very quickly using those schema migrations.
That sounds like such a great setup. And I was telling you before that I would love to read a blog post about this at some point, because we get these questions almost every day on our Slack and on GitHub of people that just don't really know how to best integrate Prisma in their production environments, like how to enable proper automation with testing, with deployment, with migrations, and how all of that fits together, because it's just a lot of moving pieces. And if you don't have a good overview, I think, as you do with all your experience from Uber and your work now at Trunk, where you have seen very kind of complex engineering setups, very complex environments. You have an understanding of what it takes to make a proper one for yourself now. And a lot of people who don't have the same experience, who have this challenge as the first time in their career, they often don't know where to go. So this is definitely content that I think would be super valuable for anybody to read.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would want to read that for sure. That sounds super interesting. It sounds like a really cool setup.
Cool.
It's really cool to see how people are taking Prisma and using it for their own workflows. How basically it's like a building block. It's so extensible. So it's cool to hear stories like that.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, is there anything else that you want to share with us or our audience before we let you go?
No, I think that was it.
All right, then thank you so much, Matt. It was a great pleasure having you on. All the best with Trunk. And yeah, maybe we see each other in a future episode.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Niko.
Bye-bye. All right, that was really interesting. Have you heard of Trunk before, by the way? Have you seen it? Or have you learned about it because we shared it internally as they're using Prisma?
So I had seen it on Twitter a couple times, and I've popped up in the web page and looked at their docs, but I've never actually played around with it. I definitely want to give it a try, though. I was looking at it last night, and it looks super cool. It looks like it's come a long way already.
Nice. All right, then I think we can move on to our last guest for today, and that's Aydrian from Cockroach. So let's welcome Aydrian up here. Oh, and before name tag, we just have to learn how to arrange the name tags properly. Hey, Aydrian, it's good to see you.
Hello, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And welcome back, by the way, right?
Right. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, welcome back. I think we had you on the show not too long ago, actually. Is that right?
It's true. When we were announcing that Cockroach went into preview.
the preview connector, right? And now you're here just a few months later talking about the GA release. But maybe to give people a sense of what Cockroach actually is, maybe you could just start with a brief introduction and a quick overview of what CockroachDB is, and then we'll dive a little bit more into the weeds of Prisma together with Cockroach. And I think that you've also been building a sample app. I saw that on your Twitch streams where you were using Remix and Prisma and CockroachDB, of course. But yeah, maybe start us off with just a little bit of an introduction about Cockroach.
Sure. So CockroachDB is a cloud-native distributed SQL database. We were built from the ground up to be distributed. We deploy on things like Kubernetes. We can deploy on lots of different things. But we are using the Postgres wire protocol. So like that helped people out in the very beginning who were wanting to use Prisma with CockroachDB, but it didn't support everything. And so I'm so glad that we were able to join with you all and get that out. And it's out now, so that's really great. Lost my train of thought. But we are distributed. And whenever I'm out talking with people, the first question I always get is, why is it called Cockroach? And that's because, kind of like a cockroach, we can scale rapidly, thrive anywhere, and survive anything, just like a cockroach.
Great name.
But yeah, so if you are looking for a database, we have a serverless offering that has the elastic scale and consumption-based pricing, and it's really cool to play with, and that's great because that's my job.
All right, so if I understand correctly, like looked at it from the outside, it basically looks like a Postgres database because what I can send to is basically SQL in the Postgres dialect, but under the hood, it's way smarter than a traditional Postgres database because it's distributed and it does a lot of fancy things that I probably want when I build or like when I really need to scale my application.
Yeah, so from the developer side, it just looks like you're using Postgres. You can use your favorite Postgres client or just use Prisma. But underneath, like I said, it was built from the ground up to be distributed. So you have all of the power of a relational database with the foreign keys, the ACID transactions, and it's like, what's the other thing that I throw in there? ACID transactions and consistency. Oh yeah, and just my dog learned how to go up and down the stairs, so you can see him in the background. But we have the ability to scale horizontally like a document database. So instead of beefing up the machines to get more RAM and things like that, you can just add more nodes. So that's something that document databases have been able to excel at with scaling. And we can do that just as well because we have the wire protocol layer, which uses Postgres. But whenever you get down into the storage layer, it's just a key value store. And that's what allows us to be able to distribute that over nodes. And if you're interested in the architecture, I highly recommend going to Cockroach University. There is an intro to distributed SQL and CockroachDB that like really lays out like how we do it. And I think it's very fascinating. And I don't usually find these things fascinating, but it's a cool course to take, totally free.
I can vouch for that. I've been going through that course actually, and it's really cool. So
yeah, because it really walks through like how we're using Raft and like how things are partitioned out and distributed. Nice.
Do you recall any particular learnings from the course, Sabin, or was it too long ago?
No, I'm still going through it actually. Particularly, like I'm still grasping the whole concept of serverless databases and how like relational databases can work on a scaled environment like that. So a lot of what I found really interesting is just the deeper explanations of what that actually means and how it actually works. So that's where I'm at in the courses right now, and I'm looking forward to getting into more of the nitty gritty pieces.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So like how did developers use CockroachDB typically before Prisma came around? We only launched it a year ago. I think Prisma has been, or like Cockroach has been around for a bit longer. So like what were kind of the most typical ways how people would interact with it?
Yeah, so CockroachDB has been around for 8 years. The company Cockroach Labs, the creator and maintainer of CockroachDB, has been around for 7. We just celebrated our 7th birthday, and Twitter celebrated by banning us because we were under the age of 13. So that was a very exciting day, but we're back on Twitter now. And yeah, before Prisma, because we use that Postgres wire protocol, we are Postgres compatible. I think 90% compatible to Postgres 13. So the big things that we're missing, or the big things that we don't yet support, are stored procedures and user-defined functions. But you could just find whatever your favorite Postgres client was. So like every language has one, and they have multiples, and so we support a lot of those clients and a lot of the ORMs that go along with them as well.
I see. Yeah. And that's then how our collaboration came to be, basically, because people saw CockroachDB, they saw it's compatible with Postgres, and they started using it with Prisma's Postgres connector.
Yeah.
And because it is compatible, it worked for a lot of them. But then there are always edge cases that weren't quite covered by the Postgres connector. And that actually also was a question for us internally, how we want to deal with this. Like, is this something where we have to insist, no, if you're saying you're supporting Postgres, then it should work with our Postgres connector? Or if we kind of acknowledge there are databases that look similar to Postgres, but they just have their own specifics that warrant building their own connectors. And I think that like Cockroach was a really good example there that just needed its own connector, because there are some specifics that are just too different from how Postgres works under the hood. So we want to do both databases justice, and that's why we built these two connectors.
Yeah, this has been an incredible journey for me, because even before I started with CockroachDB, I immediately tried to use CockroachDB with Prisma, and so I was trying it out and I was running into these issues. The big thing is like migrations weren't working, and you had to kind of build the database first and then pull that in, and so that was a flow that worked pretty well. But whenever I started, like even during the interviews, I was like, well, you have to promise me you're going to work with Prisma. And so I've been working along with it every bit of the way, building apps. I built it with the Postgres connector, and then I was very excited whenever we got the preview. I'm still building apps, which means that now, since you've released the GA version, I got to go back and change all of my sample apps so it uses the latest and greatest.
All right. Yeah, and I see that you have your own Twitch channel where you're regularly streaming or like live streaming yourself coding.
Yep.
And I don't want to put you on the spot here, but maybe if you're up to it, then you could quickly show what you're currently working on. I think it's this full stack app with Remix and Prisma. If you're up for it, I haven't asked you this before, so if it's not in a runnable state right now, you don't have to do it.
Yeah, I don't have a demo set up. I'm actually working on it with Demetrius Clark at Netlify. And so I can kind of give you an overview of what we're trying to do. So we are gearing up for Remix Conf, which is happening in less than 2 weeks. And we have what we're calling a hack and hang happening during the opening night, the kind of the meet and greet. And so over on the side, there's going to be Netlify and CockroachDB hosting this hack and hang. And we're going to have kind of a little challenge where we are creating a remix stack. So that's like the big thing that will get you up and running really fast with a specified stack. And so we're building something that can be deployed to Netlify. It can use CockroachDB and get it up very quickly. And so we're building this kind of interesting digital business card type thing where you can create these cards on your account, and then you can go to somebody else and scan it, and it will save their information into the database as a contact. And we're really using that as a way to like prove that they got the thing up and running. So they can come over, we can scan it, and then we can give you T-shirts, stickers, etc. So it's going to be really interesting. It's not really ready yet, but I do have it kind of working back and forth. It's something I've been working on with my stream. Yeah.
That sounds really, really cool. Yeah, we'll just refer people to your Twitch channel then for a follow-up, and if they want to see like how are you building that app. And of course, have a lot of fun at RemixConf in 2 weeks. I think you'll maybe meet Sabin there, right?
Yeah, we are already got some plans in the works, but I believe y'all will be there sponsoring as well. I'm looking forward to maybe seeing the first CockroachDB Prisma stickers that are going to be coming out.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really nice to have in-person conferences again, right? I mean, Reactathon, I think last week was one of the first really big conferences where I felt, okay, in 2 years, this is one of the first conferences where everybody that I follow on Twitter just posts pictures and you really see the community coming together. I guess that RemixConf will be kind of similar, and I hope that Prisma Day in just about a month actually will also be a similar experience. So I'm super excited for that. All right, Aydrian, any last words before we let you go for today?
I don't think so. If you're at the conference, come by and say hi. Otherwise, you feel free to join me on the stream and give CockroachDB serverless a try.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, Aydrian.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great to meet you.
Nice. All right. We are already a little bit over time, at least over the hour. Let's put it that way, because we don't actually have a limit, so we can't be over time. I would suggest that we wrap this up with a quick plug about the Prisma Day. And actually, I also quickly wanted to mention our Series B announcement. Sabin, would you be open to sharing your screen again? And then you can maybe open the Series B announcement first.
Do you know what the URL is for that?
Prisma.io/blog.
Oh.
And
I'll just go to the blog here.
Yeah, or like that. And then it's the second to last. Oh, and let me also fix the nameplates. All right. We raised our Series B funding round, 40 million that we got from Altimeter. And I think the most exciting thing about this announcement is actually not that we got this money, but what we're going to do with it. And I think it's going to be twofold. So on the one hand, of course, we really want to continue investing into the development of the open source ORM. This is really the main thing that we're building at Prisma, what everybody has been getting excited about for the last 2 years since we launched the first alpha of it. And yeah, that's really the bread and butter, I think, of what we do at Prisma. But of course, we are a VC-funded company. And as a VC-funded company, we'll have to become profitable one day and actually make money. And you can't really do that with open source just by itself. And that's why we consider ourselves a commercial open source company. So we're building, in this case, a commercial platform around the open source tool. So people will be able in the future to also continue using everything that's open source, of course, entirely free of charge, as it always is with open source. But if you're then working in a development team or in a larger organization, you might want to have, you might have the need for more sophisticated workflows when it comes to your database infrastructure, when it comes to your Prisma setup. And that's really where we want to create value that people are then going to be charged for. And the way how we frame it at the moment is that we want to build what we call an application data platform. And that really is a new kind of technical concept that doesn't exist yet, or at least not explicitly. It does exist already, actually. It does exist at bigger companies like Facebook and Twitter, where as an application developer, you actually don't really get to interact with the database directly anymore, but instead you have these infrastructure teams that are working at these companies whose sole purpose basically is to make the life of the actual application developer easier by making sure that whatever data they need, they can get in a convenient way, in a safe way, in a performant way, but so that the individual application developer whose main goal is to just build out new features doesn't have to deal with all of these lower level questions. So that's where we draw the inspiration from for the application data platform. And if you want to learn more about this, I really encourage you to check out the blog post, because that's where we go into detail about a couple of the concepts that are relevant when thinking about the application data platform, as well as some of the concrete features that we have already built or that we're planning to build for the Prisma data platform, which is the Prisma version of the application data platform. Yeah, maybe you can drop the link to the article in the chat, Sabin,
Sure.
and then we can move on to Prisma Day. If you still have StreamYard somewhere.
I do, but I don't have a box to drop anything in the chat. Interesting.
Okay. Well, the comments on the right. If you click on comments in the sidebar, don't you
Yeah.
see?
No, I just
Maybe.
see comments, but I'm
Okay,
not signed in. I don't think I have an account with StreamYard.
All right. Well.
I'll do it. No worries.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Then Tasin takes over, dropping the link to the announcement blog post. And yeah, let's move on to Prisma Day. Maybe I think we have a banner on the side. Oh yeah, the latest is just it has just been announced on our blog as well. And yeah, Prisma Day this year is going to happen in person again, which is going to be really, really nice. So the last 2 editions of Prisma Day have been remote, entirely online, and this year it's happening back in Berlin in a really summery location. It's going to happen outside on a hopefully beautiful summer day. We'll have 2 days. June 15th is the workshop day, I think. And June 16th is the main conference day, where we'll have a couple of talks. If you scroll down, Sabin, I think we can already tease a couple of the speakers that we have confirmed.
Okay.
There's the list. So we have Alexandra from the Blitz team. I think her talk is going to be about some SQL tips and tricks that not everybody might be aware of. Then Hassan, who is going to talk about how they're using Prisma at Nuna at his startup. Jesse from MongoDB, actually we had him here. We did a stream together with Jesse just a few weeks ago at the MongoDB launch week. Josh Goldberg, who's going to talk about TypeScript and specifically Prisma client adventures in type-safe Prisma client land or something like this, I think is the title of his talk. Liz from PlanetScale is going to be there, and Michael Hayes, who is the author of Pothos, right? Yeah, Pothos is the name of the library. It's a code-first GraphQL schema library that also has an excellent Prisma plugin. The event will be emceed by David Price, core member of the Redwood team, who also has been on the stream before. So it will really be a nice coming together of the entire Prisma community, it feels like. And to answer the question that just popped up in the comments as to whether the event will be streamed, yes, it will. And I think some people have to join remotely as well. Sabin, I think you won't be able to make it to Prisma Day in person. Tasin, I think for you, it's very questionable whether you'll be able to make it as well. But you will be able to join via the live stream that we're going to set up. So for everybody who can't join us in person this year, you can join us remotely still. All right. I think with that, we can wrap up today's stream. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you here in 3 weeks again. Bye-bye.